Right, hello, it's Paul Green from the business community with another one of our spotlights on interviews where we delve into the business journey of a particular person, and that particular person today is Jamie Cochrane. Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for inviting me to do this.
No worries. Thanks for agreeing to do it. So to start off with, just want to introduce yourself and let people know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Jamie Cochrane. I work for a company called PBC Business Recovery and Insolvency. We provide financial advice and solutions to both businesses and individuals that are struggling financially, whether that be from a small sort of one-man band who's struggling, maybe paying the tax, or a large company that doesn't know, how they're going to pay the wage bill at the end of the month.
Okay, thank you very much. So, how did you end up being where you are? What's that business journey that got you into the seat you're sitting in right now, Jamie?
Accident is the simple way to sum it up. I think the vast majority of people that end up in the insolvency industry fall into it by accident. I don't think anyone sort of, in that careers day at school say, "Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Yeah, I want to be an insolvency practitioner. I don't think that happens. My journey, when I was at school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I left school, until I did Young Enterprise, which was a scheme for allowing a group of teenagers to run a micro business for 12 months. And each one of those businesses comes with a business mentor, someone who's in the business world themselves. And mine was someone Paul, Alan Price.
Oh, okay.
Who's obviously a former member of your community. And I got to know Alan through that. And then we kind of stayed in touch because I knew Alan's son. He's a couple of years younger than me, but we're in the same house at school. And then just after I was on site one day in the summer at school, just having probably sat an A-level exam, Alan offered me a holiday job out of the blue. I said yes, thank you very much, because I didn't have really any plans for that summer, and I thought, the money could be good before going to university.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I took that, started off as the junior, kind of making the tea, answering the door, doing the filing, doing the jobs that no one really wants to do, and then I went off to university after having worked there for about 8 weeks, but then basically I came back I worked over the Christmas holidays and then the Easter holidays and then the following summer holidays. And it kind of got to a point where every time I came back, there was always a shed load of work for me to do, almost like they'd been saving it up maybe for the couple of weeks before I got back.
Especially for you.
Yeah. And then some of the colleagues that are still colleagues now, were kind of saying, kind of intimating, when you finish university, you're going to come and join us full time, which was obviously nice to hear. And then I basically got to a stage where I was hating being at university. The actual course I was doing, everything else about university was great, maybe too great. Might look back and my parents might say. And it basically got to a stage. The key point, which I always say when people ask me this question, is I was in a business. So part of my degree was to do with was doing business studies and economics. And I was in this lecture, and the lecturer summed it up by saying, "Well, large PLCs like Tesco can typically have more than one shareholder." I was like, "Yeah, okay. Well, I knew that maybe when I was 13, 14." I'm paying whatever I was paying back then to learn this stuff, and I'm not enjoying it. And I was really enjoying the holiday time, actually going back to work for Marsh and Price, as they were then called. Allied to that, my cousin, who's a couple of years older than me, I'd seen her go through university, graduate with a first-class degree in the degree that you need to do the dream job that she wanted to do, and couldn't get employed at the time. And I always say to people, well, I dropped out and then I made the part-time holiday job a full-time job. I did it the other way around. I made it a full-time job, and then I went to my tutor at university. I was like, I'm dropping out. I've got a job. And he was a bit stunned because he was one of those university lecturers that, students are an inconvenience. But yeah, and then so I kind of started on a training contract and worked my way through that, and I'm still here. in summary, really, that's kind of where how I've got to. And then obviously the firm's been through a couple of it'd been through a merger just before I joined, and then it's been through a couple of buyouts, and it's obviously changed name to PVC about 7 years ago now, 7.5 years ago now. But yeah, that's the journey.
Excellent. Okay, what were you studying at university? Sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
No, I did. So it was a course called Mathematics, Operational Research, Statistics, and Economics, which everyone called Morse for short. The operational research bit's the typical postman problem, which was the bit I really liked and enjoyed, actually, which was you've got 20 deliveries to make. What's the quickest way to get to join all those 20 dots together? And it's basically building little computer programs, plugging the information in and the answer coming out, which is clearly what all these, the likes of supermarket deliveries and guys do. They obviously have these procedures. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, as we're recording this, we're still in. We're out of lockdown now, but we're still in COVID times. We'll always be in COVID times because it's not going to go away. And obviously, the government has put a lot of support into small businesses to try and help them, I guess, survive over the last 18 months. So I'm guessing your business has been relatively quiet, given the fact that there's been some low-cost funding available to most businesses. What are your thoughts on that going forward? Sort of like pinch a phrase from a podcast I know you used to be part of, as did I. Are we kicking the can down the road a little bit with what's being done by the government? What do you think?
I think the government's definitely done that job. It's obviously put a lot of stuff in place, as you mentioned. The bounce back loan was very easy access, and I think we've all seen the news stories about how that's been abused, misused as well. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how much of that gets paid back. But as you rightly say, we at the start of the pandemic we were pretty quiet. I mean, I definitely dealt with one business. He was the company imported wine from northern Italy and sold it to restaurants in London. So he suffered because northern Italy obviously suffered before we did with the pandemic, and then he basically realised that if he lost a summer of selling wine to restaurants in London, he wasn't going to survive that. So he made that decision fairly early. But I think then everyone else kind of went, actually, okay, I'm just going to sit, and pretty much everyone's going to be in this position. Obviously, the government's then introduced these schemes that have definitely worked in terms of their intentions, in terms of like the furlough scheme. It's definitely kept people in employment. Although obviously now that's starting to unwind. I can't see that being extended again. I think the only reason the provisions have been extended were because the government obviously delayed the roadmap, so they had to push things a bit further. The main thing which has infected the insolvency industry is that there's a ban on. It's pretty much a ban on issuing statutory demands or winding up petitions against companies.
Okay.
Now, the person who issues 85% of those petitions is the government themselves. It's the revenue. And whilst the vast majority of those don't actually end up with a winding up order being made, it is normally the trigger for a director or business owner to actually look and go, actually, okay, now I've got this letter from HMRC. I can't ignore the problem any longer. Now that deadline is due to expire on the 30th of September, 2021. Now that's been extended. It was due to end sometime like 30th of September last year, and it's been extended 4 times for 3 months of time. We were pretty sure the last time it wasn't going to get moved from June, but then I think, as I said, the delaying of that roadmap by 4 weeks kind of meant that they had to push it again. Time will tell whether they'll extend it again. We can't really say they can, because at some point the government needs to actually start recovering some taxes to fund everything that it's spent in the last 18 months. So that's been the biggest impact on the insolvency industry. The whole insolvency industry has always said at some point we are going to be very busy. the stats for so the corporate insolvency statistics for 2020 were about 28% lower than they were in 2019.
Okay.
And they have risen slightly in 2021, but we're not effectively back to the 2019 base level. We have seen an increase in inquiries at PBC in the last 6 to 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the vast majority of those are businesses, and they're not coming forward and saying that COVID is, all these lockdowns has been the thing that's tipped them over the edge. These are probably businesses that may have come to see us 12 to 18 months ago, but the government support, the bounce back loan especially, has enabled them to get, as you say, another, the government has kicked that can to this point. And at some point, it does need unwinding. Obviously, the first payments now are being due on this bounce back loan. There will be businesses out there that took it out 12 months ago, maybe a bit longer, and thought, well, I'll take it just as a safety net. Mm-hmm. And actually, they thought, well, I'm not going to need it because I've got through everything else. And probably would have been okay, but for us having to be locked down from January to April again. Mm-hmm. So when they actually took the loan out, they didn't actually forecast could it be repayable from their normal, because they just assumed they were just going to keep it for 12 months and repay it, and it was going to be the insurance blanket. Mm-hmm. So I think that is at some point is going to have a trickle. But the big one will be when HMRC start pursuing everyone properly again, because as I said, they are the normal, pretty much the last trigger that people use to seek advice.
Okay, so if people in business now are struggling, or they're looking at their cash flow forecast, and they can see that that the cash is going to run out, or there's going to be an issue with paying back the loans they've got, or the VAT they owe, etc., etc. What should they do? At what point should they contact you in an ideal world?
In an ideal world, if you know that's going to happen at some point in the future, you need to seek advice, and you need to seek that as early as possible. We accept that that's a very hard thing to do, in terms of either sort of swallowing pride, or sort of, you look at typically how people don't go and see the doctor when they really should. It's that kind of that similar scenario. The earlier you seek advice, the more options there are that are available, the more likely it is that we're going to be talking a restructuring and a rescue procedure rather than a terminal liquidation type procedure. Sort of say if you're a business that's buried, that business is buried its head in the sand for 6 months, and then we go, right, okay, we're going to approach the creditors and put this rescue plan together that's going to need creditor support and approval. What's their attitude going to be if you've just ignored them for 6 months? I don't think they're going to be that receptive. But actually, if you come to them sort of fairly early, you're more likely to get a bit of support from them, particularly because you're going to be carrying on trading. So they're going to, yes, they might have a write-off or a partial write-off of what they're owed at the minute, but hopefully the business will survive and they'll be able to carry on making profit from that business going forward.
So I guess the earlier somebody comes to you, if they think they might be in trouble down the line, the more flexibility you've got to recover the business rather than close it down.
Yes. Combined with that as well, there are things which I call the elephant traps. These are kind of antecedent transactions that if the business ultimately ends up in a liquidation or administration, then that office holder can look back, or has a duty to look back and say, well, actually, have any of these antecedent transactions or these elephant traps been trodden on? And the longer you're trading in that insolvent position, the more likely you are to have trodden on one of them. And if you're a director, sometimes if you meet the tests, there is no defense, and you could be held personally liable for that. So it's really important that you seek advice and actually give us the opportunity to explain what those elephant traps are. So actually, if you go away and actually we say, well, actually, you probably will be okay, but these are the elephant traps, don't tread on them, you're more likely to, get out the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, get that. I get that. So I ask people on these calls, what's your why? What sort of motivates you? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What's your driving force, I guess? So that is a question. What is it for you?
There's a couple of things. One, I really enjoy working in the team that we have here at PVC. I think we're a really good team. We've known each other. Most of us have known each other for 10 plus years. Since I joined the firm, there's a lot of people still here. But in terms of the insolvency work itself, every case is different. Every day is different, which is really nice. But actually, kind of advising people, you get to help them through that restructuring plan. That's really good. Kind of it's helped people come out the other side. And then on the other side of that is actually, if there are these transactions that do need pursuing, or someone has, there is a business or a director rather that has deliberately traded to try and effectively rip people off, then actually putting that position back to where it should be. It's kind of, sort of, for a start, it's trying to unpick the puzzle, trying to find the evidence to pursue that transaction, and then the reward of, seeing that everyone is, put back to the position that they should have been in, really. That's the ultimate aim. So yeah, there's kind of a couple of different reasons as to why I enjoy doing what I do.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So there's competitors out there, I guess, as other people doing, working in the insolvency and business recovery arena. What would you say distinguishes you guys from your competitor? What makes you different?
I think it's all about that personal relationship. Ultimately, as we touched on previously, I think that moment where you need to ring up the phone and talk to someone like us, you're placing an awful lot of trust in someone you've presumably never met before, to kind of guide you through a very difficult process. And we all, our competitors, we all do the same job, but it's actually all about that approach, and actually just being personable and open and honest with people, and kind of saying, actually, this is the position. These are the options that are available, and not trying to sell someone the dream that, well, actually, yeah, this rescue process is it's out there, but actually it's not going to work because either, the creditors aren't going to agree to it, or actually that's not what that individual wants. Sometimes people come to see us and actually all they want to do is just take all that stress away. But they want us to do that, and that's obviously what we can help them to do in terms of closing the company down. They don't have to, if they're worried about how they're going to, make money, or they might find that they're responsible for, they obviously, if they work in a small business, they obviously know their team very well, and it's like, well, actually, they're thinking, well, if I make someone redundant, then I know they've just bought a house and they've just taken out a mortgage, or and some people, they just want that stress to be taken away, and that's obviously what we can help them with. So it's all about being personable and open, really, and enabling them to trust us, and actually but also enabling the people that may have referred them to us in the first place to build those relationships as well.
And I assume the way you work is the first meeting is just a free consultation to work out what you can do.
Yeah, our initial consultations are always free. They're always no obligation, and they're completely confidential, and they're impartial. We are giving the best advice for the client sat in front of us, rather than rather than what would effectively give us the biggest fee. So yeah, we don't work like that.
So again, based on what I said earlier, there's no harm in someone sort of picking up the phone now if they think they are going to be in trouble 3 to 6 months down the line. It's probably better than to do it now and find out what their options are, rather than, as you say, leave it to the last minute, and then your options are limited, and there's a few elephant traps they're probably fallen into along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so 18 months where businesses have been suffering roughly through the COVID, and that's been their biggest challenge. What outside of that in your business journey, what is the biggest challenge that you as a business or you as an individual have faced?
I think for me it's quite a personal one, because obviously, as I kind of described the story, that I came in at the bottom of the firm, and in my journey through the firm, there are people that at some point I reported to them, whereas now they report to me. So we've had to manage that. Both me and the firm have had to manage that challenge of that relationship kind of going. That switch in roles been. I think that's probably been the biggest challenge for me. I think in terms of it's probably just purely a personal one in terms of kind of navigating that difference in working habits and styles and relationship. But we're out the other side.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
So he must have heard us using his catchphrase from his podcast.
Yeah.
And tuned in. So yeah, he just made a comment about that how trust is important with insolvency practitioners, and he's obviously experienced some that maybe haven't done the best job for their client.
Yeah, it's a funny one because as I was sort of saying, on that initial meeting, someone's coming to us for advice, and we're advising them. But ultimately, once we're appointed, our duty flips, and our duty is to act for the creditors as a whole. And there's probably no other industry that's like that. But our initial, I think probably the best way to answer Stephen's comment is to actually kind of outline what we do at initial inquiry. So we will sit down with them, and we will, for the first part, just let them talk, kind of explain why they are here in front of us. Obviously, let them kind of outline the story, the problems that they've encountered, and then we will outline what all those elephant traps are. Outline kind of all about. There's a thing called director disqualification. So if a company goes into liquidation or administration, the IP has a duty to submit a report on all the directors. And then the insolvency service decide if that directors needs disqualify, and that happens to a very, very small percentage of directors, and they are typically looking to disqualify those directors that have just used limited liability as a tool to basically just rip people off, to use my phrase from earlier. But at some point, we will then ask that director what my colleague Gary calls the $64 million question. Actually, what do they want? And then it's kind of matching that solution to them. So we've outlined you have trodden on this elephant trap, and that is going to need to be sorted. And coming to a plan as to how to sort that out is going to be important. Of course, ultimately you could come in a scenario where actually we don't discover that elephant trap's been trodden on until afterwards, because we weren't told. But I'm sure that's not the scenario that Stephen's describing.
Sure. Okay, thanks for that. You've kindly agreed to share some of your vast knowledge, Jamie, with us today. So I'm going to hand over the floor to you, stick you in solo mode and get my ugly face off the screen, and your beautiful one on it. So over to you, Jamie. The floor's yours.
I thought I'd spend a little bit of time just talking through the warning signs from that a business may be about to suffer a bad debt. Now, this is kind of based on experience that we see stuff that when we're looking back with hindsight, we can go, actually, all this stuff is happening. And then you can see that actually putting this knowledge out there enables people to know what these warning signs are. And then we'll talk through a couple of ways of avoiding that. I mean, we've got the typical, the checks in the post type scenario, but, really in 2021, are people still paying stuff by check? I'm not entirely sure. One thing to watch out for is actually, are you being paid a round figure? Now, your invoice may come to exactly £1,000, but it might come to £1,012.23. But actually, if someone only pays you £750 towards that invoice, is that a sign that they're giving you a payment to keep you sweet, but actually they can't afford to pay the whole balance in full at the time it's due? The other one that's kind of linked to that is actually, typically, historically, most businesses have run their payment runs on their invoices at the end of the month. But if you get paid at the first few days of a month, that might be a sign that business is waiting for money to come in before it can then commit to making payments out. So that might be a sign that cash is getting a little bit tight. And then we kind of come on to sort of like gossip in the industry. You might have, someone else in the industry might have rung you up and said, "Oh, yeah, have you heard what's happening at XYZ business? They appear to be struggling. They're not paying me." And kind of linked into that, actually, has the business or the directors linked to that business had issues in the past? And maybe that's something you could check on Companies House, for example. You might discover that a business or a company, especially, is late in filing accounts at Companies House. That might be a sign, one, that the business is quite disorganized, in which case that might suggest there's some problems there anyway, or actually they are deliberately not filing those accounts at Companies House because there is something in those accounts that's bad news and they don't want to become sort of public knowledge. So I'm just going to move on to a couple of suggestions. The first is simply maintaining good credit control. Set your credit limits. That you've obviously pre-decided what you're going to lend on credit, and then stick to them. And not be afraid to simply pick up the phone and talk to a business and say, "Well, actually, this payment is now overdue. Can you please pay it?" Because I think if you are that business that does that, you probably might get paid to get them off your back. I think actually, if you're confident in what you do, then you could seek payment up front. If you're confident that that's not going to lose you much business, or particularly even look to take a deposit, so you're part protected in any event for doing the work. You could look to seek personal guarantees where you're trading with a company from the director. Some directors may be unwilling to give personal guarantees because they're saying when you're trading with the company. But actually, if they're not prepared to give you a personal guarantee, that's kind of a sign maybe that they're not prepared to put themselves in that position, and they're not prepared to back their own business. So why should you be prepared to do that? And a couple of other ones at the end. Do you know who your largest customer is? Back when Carillion, the big government-backed, it did everything really, Carillion, didn't it? When that failed, we saw a spike in businesses ringing us up to say, "Well, I'm owed a load of money by Carillion. They were a large percentage of who I traded with. This is going to kill me." And actually, you probably need to avoid being in that position where you are putting all your eggs in one basket, because if that customer doesn't pay you, then what is that knock-on impact further down the chain going to be? And the last one is to just make sure that you have terms and conditions about payment terms and everything, and make sure those terms and conditions are effective, and don't be afraid to use them if you need to. So hopefully those are some good tips there to enable you to not end up with a bad debt.
Perfect, Jamie. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think there's some sound advice there and useful tips. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Final thing for you, then your ordeal will be over. So if you would just sort of give one top tip to any business owner out there, what would that top tip be?
I think we spoke about businesses coming to see us when, I think you mentioned it, Paul, when they know that the cash is going to run out. Well, the first thing there is they actually need to be measuring that. They actually need to have those systems in place to actually, so they know what position their business is in. Because if they don't know that, then how can you make any sound financial decisions about your future? So I think that is one of my top tip, is to actually measure things and then take action if those measurements suggest that you need to.
And someone who's just popped up that can help with that sort of thing, Sarah Randall from Cotton's Accountants, sort of like saying, the point you made about the reliance on one customer was a valid point. But yeah, hopefully, whoever your accountant is, they're helping provide that sort of information for you. And rather than just doing the statutory back-looking historic stuff, they're actually looking forward and just sort of based on your sales and revenue, etc., etc. They can put together sort of forecasts for business on cash flow, which gives you a little bit of an indicator as to what's going to happen, rather than be caught out by surprise by a VAT bill you weren't expecting, or a tax bill you weren't expecting, or whatever's sort of like going to pop up in your business. So yeah, certainly recommend that for any business. You've got to measure it to manage it, haven't you, to coin a phrase.
Yeah, and I think actually when you said, "Oh, I've got an unexpected tax bill," well, really, none. There shouldn't be one. There should be no such thing.
But you must hear it. You must hear it
all the time, and it's like,
exactly.
well, there is no such thing.
I know, and it's all forecastable, isn't it? At the end of the day. Okay, Jamie, thank you very much for your time today. I know you're a busy boy, so I'll let you crack on with the rest of your day. And thanks for sharing your business journey and your knowledge with us today. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Paul.